Beautiful people, and welcome to the Astro Aura podcast, the show where we provide practical solutions to modern day problems using astrology, the chakras, all from a Black ancestral perspective. My name is Coach Hekaimaak.
And I am Mama Aki,
and we are priests of the Ra tradition of ancient Kemet. And on today's show, we will be talking about the problems in modern day spirituality.
And oh, aren't there many?
So strap on your seatbelts because it's going to be a bumpy ride. Some people are going to hit their heads, but we're going to get to our destination.
You know, so it's so interesting. We were talking about the idealism of modern spirituality and what initially attracted us. And, you know, initially we viewed modern spirituality as this oasis to escape what was so obvious to us and studying history, the abuse of the Judeo-Christian faiths, and not them in of themselves, but them being used as tools of oppression and exploitation. And so knowing as a divine and God-connected people as we are, that we still needed that connection, seeking out something different, only years later to really realize that, wow, all the racism, all the patriarchy, and this overarching Indo-European worldview that we thought we were escaping by leaving the major Abrahamic faiths. We were still knee-deep in it.
Like you think you're returning
modern spirituality.
You think you're returning to your Black ancestral traditions, and you're not. You're getting the same thing. It just looks a little different. It's cooked differently. They use different ingredients, but it's still the same thing.
Yes. So do you want to share? Because I like the way you define.
Modern spirituality. So if you the way that spirituality would be defined today is not the same way that it would be defined in ancient times, regardless of ethnicity of the people. But we're speaking specifically for Black ancestral people because that is our descent, where we've gone in the world. So if you were to Google spirituality, right, the definition that you would get would be from Oxford: the quality of being concerned with the human spirit or soul as opposed to physical or tangible things. So one of the problems with that definition off the bat is that it does not include God, right? The second problem is this hard word of opposition, right? It creates this split. And what we'll find is that split of thinking, that black and white thinking, is something that's very prevalent all over Indo-European thought. It goes back to the Greeks, to Plato especially. Marimba Ani and Yurugu wrote extensively about it. Thank the ancestors for her. And so this oppositional thinking becomes a problem when Black people who are of African descent try to apply that to how they are going to engage with God, because that system of thinking is not it's not truly based in reality. For example, someone might think, well, it's dualization. No, the dualization in ancient Kemet, the dualization of like the Nomo, the twinness of the Dogon, the dualization of Heru and Set, right? The dualization of Yin and Yang says that there is this opposition, but there's also relationship, right? Set is uncle to Heru. The Nomos are twins, right? Yin and Yang, the male and female, cannot be separated. They are within each other. But the oppositional thinking of Indo-European thought is that one has to be destroyed. One is good and one is bad. And that's where you get this, you have to rise out of your lower self. You have to transcend the lower self. But where are you going to leave the lower self? Where are you going, right? Because if you look into Kemet, if you look at the Hekaimaak or the Neb, the so-called Sphinx, we see an image of acknowledging these lower self or these animal instincts and knowing what you have to do to control it, right? And that astrologically, that monument, that statue signifies, the sign of Leo, which is the sign of mastery, right? So a Black ancestral perspective of what spirituality would look like would be defined first and foremost from the fact that material riches and wealth are not opposed to how you engage with God. In fact, when you carry out your personal and familial, right, and ancestral, and I'm placing emphasis on that because modern day spirituality is very individualistic. It's about you and God. But Black ancestors, people who are of African descent, all indigenous people, it's not about you. It's also about your family bloodline that also has his destiny, right? And when you fulfill those things, you receive blessings from God. You receive riches. You receive wealth. You receive success, right? When you carry out that assistance in God maintaining order, promoting order, which was defined in ancient Kemet by the Interu Ma'at Ma'al. So,
Yes.
yeah, you want to hear my definition? Did I?
No, that was a great definition. So I wanted I wanted you to talk a little bit more about what comes together to kind of form that definition, like what major schools of thought influence
Oh yeah, yeah,
what we call modern day spirituality.
yeah. So you have a compromise, right? You have a compromise between Western psychology based in Freudian and Jungian psychology, right? This is why when you read spiritual text today, you read any text, about yoga, you'll often hear the word, and I'm talking about modern day texts, not the ancient ones. They talk about ego. It's like, well, this word ego just came about in the late 1800s. So how is this now we're going to connect this back to 2000, 4,000 years ago, right? So it has that aspect. Then you have the aspect of yogic philosophy, which is bringing in this definition of what the purpose of life is, right? So when in yogic philosophy, and this is from the Indo-European perspective, the goal of life is to transcend it, to get out of it, right? That life is a prison and you want to escape. This is not the definition in ancient Kemet. This is not the definition in Nubia. This is not the definition of the Yoruba, of the Bantu. No one wants to escape Earth. Earth is not a prison, right? So you also have another aspect of it. It's four aspects. So the third aspect is of the Western occult traditions of Kabbalah and Rosicrucianism, Hermeticism, right? These make up the magical practices of the rituals that people do. They're more of the active practices. And then the fourth is the just European cultural history, right? Whether we like it or not, these definitions of spirituality, how we approach it, are based upon our European brothers and sisters' experience before Europe was created, their experience in the cold, in the ice, right? This is one of the reasons why there's this underlying psychology of wanting to escape the planet, right? Freezing when it's cold outside, what do you want to do?
And also of opposition with nature.
Yeah, opposition with
nature. Which we know that inter is the Kemetic word for God, right? Mm-hmm. That nature comes from. So this opposition and seeing that, you want to destroy a part of you like that, this idea, even how you hear Mother Nature described as just seeking to destroy all the time. And instead of just like, okay, this is a part of the cycle of cleansing. This is a part of the cycle, but it's like
we did need that rain and that thunderstorm and that hurricane. People died, but even that perspective of the approach to people's death when that happens is not a Black ancestral perspective. It's very one-sided. It's very that it has to be good. Remember, it's this black and white thinking of this is good and that is bad, right? So we want to eliminate the bad. It's inferior. It's horrible. Let's get rid of it, right?
One of the things that I really thought I was getting away from going into modern spirituality was patriarchy. That's something that I saw very clearly, having a lot of experiences in both Islam and Christianity, and it's something that I wanted no parts of. My ancestors were like, listen, this is not how you used to doing business. So I was pretty rebellious against the ideas and the culture that really depicted women in a second class state. Yeah. And the cultural practices to back it up, right? Yeah. So pretty resistant against that. So I thought,
yes, you are.
finding something new.
Yes, you are.
That wouldn't be the case. But, as I looked around, I noticed like, wow, this is still pretty much male dominated. Yeah. And that the majority of the enlightened people,
there's no female sages. Yeah.
All of this
we're not famous.
Still mostly men. And one of the more insidious ways that the patriarchy, I feel, has really slipped into modern spirituality is the depiction of emotions. So people who study spirituality at all know that emotions are more associated with the yin principle or the feminine principle in women, right?
Yeah.
And opposed to that in this modern spirituality is that rational mind, right?
Yeah. So-called rational
The
mind.
so-called rational mind,
Yeah.
and that is what's supposed to save you from the devil of your emotions.
Yeah.
Essentially, of course, I am just making it curt and short for this.
No,
podcast,
I mean, but it's real.
That's
It's real.
What, if you boil it down to
that's exactly what it is.
That is what is being said.
Yeah.
And I think that, emotions, again, because from a Black ancestral point of view, nothing is a poison or medicine within itself. It's,
it's
when
context
it's needed,
and relative,
the dosage, and all of that. So we can say the same for emotions. So I think it's very well documented that emotions can be destructive.
Yeah.
And that they can work against you.
Mm-hmm.
But what's not well espoused is the role that Inter or God has for emotions and how they can play a very powerful and positive role in your life, that you shouldn't be seeking to eradicate your emotions and become this rational being who's,
And that idea comes from Platonic thought. That's Greek thought about this whole thing about, mentioning the great Romani again in Urugu. She goes over it in a very deep manner. This idea of you're rational, you're logical, and therefore better, you're superior. That is a Greek thing. You don't see that. You don't see that anywhere else. I haven't, and I've been studying for a long time. You don't see that anywhere else. But.
Yeah. And I think one of the roles that, just in my own reflection, I've seen that God has for us with those emotions is they can be very powerful catalysts for change in our lives. And it's like you're trying to stuff it down. But what if it coming up is a part of God's plan?
Yeah.
And even, you study astrology. I'm going to study astrology, but I know you're very passionate about astrology. And we can see in the transits and the cycles that there's times where, that planet Mars is transiting and you feel that energy come up and you have the energy to address something that's probably been lingering for a very long time.
Yeah.
And to me, it's just knowing that the heavens even dictate sometimes these emotions that come up, that this is a part of Inter's plan, and to stop the
demonizing of the warriors. Really, if we want to talk about people in control, if you want to go down that route of conspiracy, it's demonizing warriors, at the end of the day. And that manipulative chakras need to, and even from Chinese medicine perspective, that gallbladders need to assert itself and establish. The lungs need to establish that boundary, which makes sense because they also tell us not to have any boundaries, right? Have unconditional love.
Right. So it's kind of like the good emotions. So benevolence and patience and compassion are just all good. But I'm sure that we can all think of a time where patience in the wrong context was devastating. Yeah. That compassion for the wrong person or in the wrong situation. I mean, I told you I learned a new term called abuse recruiters, right? Where people are like not really acknowledging the harm that some people do we understand that in the grand scheme of everything, that people are on their journey to learn and grow, but it's extremely damaging, and especially to the people who wrong has been done to, when you're kind of like, that's just where they are along their journey, and you just need to, you just need to forgive and forget, because, ultimately we're just all, it's like, that's not a Black ancestral perspective. Yeah. That is a perspective, but that is not a Black ancestral perspective. Yeah. So we see where this promotion of certain emotions as virtuous, as just absolutely virtuous, and other emotions as absolutely the devil and of the lower self, are
and that's
not
wisdom.
Not a creation of our Black ancestors wherever they have been over this globe. And that's just something that I'm really passionate. The more that I see that, I'm just like, okay, this is really imbalanced. And you see it
astrologically too.
And it's so interesting in this day and age. You would be called a warmonger, or these just very
you're going down the dark path because you confronted me, or you set a boundary. You're a bad guy. We know this in these social situations. From astrological context, give the example of Mars is transiting your 6th house. You know, you at work. The sixth house deals with work. It deals with competition, enemies, and that person who's been annoying, right? Who's been getting on everybody's nerves. Nobody checks the Mars transit your sixth house, and you give it to them one day. You need to stop. And people tell you because you did that, you're a bad person or you did too much. That was from heaven. You've been suppressing all this time. But that was from heaven. That's where the energy came from. The transit's affecting you. You know, you can't blame. There's nobody to blame it on. That because it's like people only want to view God in terms of you're being a vessel of God when you bring joy and positivity. But when you go to confront somebody, well, no, that's not God. Leave it in God's hands. That's very one-sided. That's not wisdom. That don't make any sense because God checks everything. You know, in nature and animals have territories. Everything has boundaries and a defense system.
Oh yes.
You know.
Oh yes, and it's just really interesting because we talked about this how what has happened in history as these ideas have been able to really proliferate.
Yeah.
And you have the biggest theft of wealth, of land that's occurring right under the watch of the Judeo-Christian faith and modern spirituality, which is really just the cousin that you didn't know they were related, but they're first cousins.
They're first cousins.
They share a whole lot of
blood.
So,
the Aryans and the Indo-European, they are cousins, you know. And all of this can only occur in the age of Pisces, right? Astrologically speaking, we know that Pisces, sometimes the negative qualities of Pisces is to be naive, right? And the opposite of Pisces is Virgo. You might have to be critical. You might have to analyze things, but we're taught not to do that, right? We're taught that that's unspiritual behavior. So, like you said, like the biggest, what is it, like 1%, 99% of the wealth is in the 1%. All this massive theft that's happening.
We know that it's a massive theft.
Yeah.
That's what we can definitively say.
Yeah. So it's like all of this stuff, all of the reality is while these things are being espoused, that people are being robbed and people being exploited massively, the sex trafficking, you know, the enslavement. And all of this is under the watch and under the guise of you're a good person if you are positive and you have unconditional love and you're open-minded and you let us do what we want to do.
And when you're wronged, make sure you pray about it so you can go to heaven later.
And get your prize later.
And make sure that you push that anger down and let it destroy you from the inside so we can keep doing what we do.
We do. Don't worry. You'll get yours later.
With impunity.
So,
yeah. You know something really interesting that I know people will bring up in terms of science is, well, you know, negative emotions, they carry the stress hormones that really, we see that people's stress levels are just so out of control these days. And I think it's important to say that from a Black ancestral perspective, we're not saying that there is no mastery required and that there's no purification required to make sure that as you're getting these signals from God through the heavens, that it's not convoluted, mixed up with the stored trauma and the stored just things that we have to work through. But we had great systems of purification, right? With the chakra system, what we love to use and gravitate toward, that you use to purify. So can a negative, one of the so-called negative emotions crop up that's really more an internal piece that hasn't been purified? Absolutely. You know? And so there is a need for that. So I don't, I just want to mention that. I know people will say like, no, these negative emotions, you're advocating for the negative emotions to destroy this world. It's like more destruction is. So with the stress hormones, it is important to understand how different stress hormones can wreak havoc on our health. But what's not talked about often is when the stress hormones are used as they should be, right, which is just an uptick in certain situations, that you have an increase in your immunity, that you have an increase in your alertness, that you have an increase that kind of gives you like the Hulk kind of powers for a short time for you to handle your business and do what needs to be done. So it's not for people to stay at these kinds of states for extended periods of time, but it's also not embracing this way of thinking that says, oh no, shove it down, shove it down, shove it down. It's like, no. Let that little shot of cortisol help you to address something that probably needed to be addressed a long time ago. One of the things that I really came to resent as I got really deep into the modern spirituality is how that depiction of emotions as the devil within that needed to be rebuked um, and sanctified is how it cut me off from some of my instinctual inner sense. And emotions can be are part of our whole instinctual system, right? That spidey sense, that emotional complex is definitely a part of that.
Yeah.
And being cut off
Just
or
directly.
feeling like that's the devil part of you, you were cutting off so much intelligence.
Yeah.
You were literally
And power.
cutting intelligence and power that interior that God has placed within you, you know? So that's just, the last piece that I wanted to add about what it's done, this, elevating the rational mind. Because, of course, under the watch of this rational mind, we've seen the most heinous cruelty and atrocity the world has ever seen.
Yeah. But I wanted to add something to what you said about the emotionalism. From just studying the spiritual text, there's this theme, right? In Christianity, the fall of the world is blamed on a woman, it's blamed on Eve. She told Adam to eat the apple. There's a similar thing that happens in yogic philosophy, right? And that philosophy is saying that even though you see Shiva paired with Shakti, you also see stories of Shakti and Brahman, right? Shakti is the feminine aspect, it's the powers of God, where it comes from Sekhem in ancient Kemet, right? In Sekhmet. And Shakti, she is blamed for the veils and illusions of the world, right? And spirituality from that perspective is that you must rise, you must transcend the veil, all the illusions of Shakti, and return to the Godhead, to Brahman, to God consciousness, which coincidentally happens to be male. So I wanted to add that for the emotions, because that's where the powers of Shakti also come from, but also the patriarchal perspective I wanted to add to before we talk about individualism. I want to talk about like racism, because this is something that is like modern day spirituality. I think we will see as time goes on will be used as a way to absolve people of their crimes, right? Of racism, of exploitation, right? Because this theme of this universality, right? This theme of being one with the next person and connecting with them, it does not lay the accountability that is and will become necessary on this planet for us to truly, unite. And once again, the face of religion, the face of perfection is Jesus, is a white man, right? The face of a spiritual leader is the Pope, another white man, right? And when you look at spirituality, if you were to Google spirituality right now, the images you're going to first see, or you're going to either see a white woman who's in a yoga uniform on a mat, or you're going to see a white man or an Indian man meditating, right? Even with AI, right? I use AI. We're using AI. We're all in the Chat GPT and Lexica and Midjourney. Well, if you were to tell the AI to create an image of meditation spirituality, it's going to show you a picture of a white person or a white woman. So it's not that AI is bad or AI is racist. It's just that this is how it's been programmed to show us what this is. And it's right in there, and it's subtle, and so nobody sees it, right? And to me, because one of the top spiritual laws that people espouse is this unification with others, then we have to understand that the onus or the weight of oneness or connecting with others is really on people of African descent and indigenous people, because we are the ones that have to put forth or suppress or get rid of our trauma to unite with our European brothers and sisters. They don't have that onus. It's not a challenge for them, because they are in positions of power. And all the yogis, right, that are watching this, the black yogis, the Kemetic yogis, right, who are watching this, know about all the racism. I studied yoga for a long time. I was considering for years becoming a yoga teacher. It was my thing for a while, because that's like the segue into spirituality. You become a yoga and you're doing your breathing and you're just so peaceful and so relaxed and you're everything, right? And they will tell you there's so much racism in the yoga teacher field. It's ridiculous, right? So once again, these are the people who are being told that these are the leaders of the new school, but it's not a new school. It's the same building, it's just a different floor.
Yeah, I don't know if you talked about you talked about the Hermeticism. Talk about history and how that all informed spiritual.
So yeah, if we were to go into these four different, parts that I say is the true modern definition of spirituality, right? If we start with, yogic philosophy, right? This idea, as I said earlier, that everything is a prison, right? And everything is cold. From an astrological perspective, right? If we're comparing, African ancestral traditions, Black ancestral traditions to the Indo-European, it's more Saturnial, right? The Indo-European, it's more cold. That's why they say words as you need to be austere, you need to be rigid, you need to be serious. This is very heavy, and this is what draws a lot of people away from it as well, right? And then they categorize those people as being inferior, and they're just not. No, that's just one way of doing spirituality. That is not the spiritual path, right? Because when you look in ancient Kemet, when you look at all Black ancestral traditions, there's this Venusian, there's this solar quality to it, right? Osar is not really, there have been people who have connected him to the planet Saturn conveniently, right? But when you look at the actual Kemetic text, he's actually associated with the planet Venus, right? A resurrection. He's in the Akan, he's associated with the sun and the moon, right? So Venus is a special planet in Kemet, right? So, and what do we know about Venus? It's about fun. It's about sex. It's about pleasure. All the things that the Indo-European aspect of, spirituality tells you should stay away from. You have to rise out of. You have people telling people they have to purify pleasure out of their swadhisthana as a way to get closer to God. That's not backed up in any Kemetic text. If you were a 12-year-old and you decided to read the Kemetic hieroglyphic dictionary, the Egyptian hieroglyphic dictionary, you will see from Wallace Budge, you will see that is not true. There's a god of pleasure, right? When you look in other African practices in the Yoruba and the Khan and the Bantu, these rituals, right? These rituals where people are dancing, right? When our European brothers and sisters came to Africa, they said, "Oh, look at them. They're just dancing. They're just having fun." They didn't know that it was a form of spiritual practice. And at another episode, we'll go deeper into brain waves and how it is. There's a difference, right? There's the separation of brainwaves and trance ability, that there's another way to accomplish your goals, right? And our African ancestors showed that way in a different perspective, not just going down under into the cold. Yeah. So, right, the Western occult traditions of Kabbalah, Rosicrucianism, Hermeticism, no disrespect to them at all. None at all. Theosophy, those schools, powerful people, right? People who, many of whom would say have good intentions, right? We also need to understand that when these traditions came out again to the foreground, to the world, especially Rosicrucianism, because their story is that they've been hidden away for a long time, right? When these traditions come back out, we see it in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, right? And therefore, a lot of the definitions of how we apply our spiritual paths, right? The light path and the dark path. These definitions were created while Europe was kidnapping, murdering, enslaving, and trafficking people of African descent. I'm going to say that again.
Say it one more time.
Say it again. These conceptions of spirituality, right? Light and darkness. Light is good, the white light, right? The white brotherhood and the dark brotherhood. These conceptions do not predate the 1500s, 1600s anywhere. They happen around the time that Europe is kidnapping, murdering, enslaving, and trafficking people of African descent and indigenous peoples all over the world. So now when you hear people say, "Oh, you're going down a dark path," or whatever, and these things about light, and light is white, right? Light is white, apparently, right? Even though when you look at the sun, the color that's coming from the sun in terms of the Aten from Kemetic perspective and Ra signifying the light, all that, the color is not white. The color, a 3-year-old, 4-year-old will tell you that the color is not white. But these conceptions, light and dark, good and bad, inferior and superior, right? Right? This is all happening while they're destroying Africa and with Pope approval, right? The papal bulls that said, go enslave these heathen people. Those who are not Christians, enslave them, take them over, right? There's no reason why these are the seeds in which it was built upon, right? But even if one would say, well, it's not there anymore, it's 2023. these things don't just go away.
No.
They're at the roots of it. But even if they were, even if we wanted to say that they were going to go away, there has to be a reason to. There's no challenge to make them go away. Right? Everybody's like, no, this is the way. It's this is the way. Yes, I am inferior if I like pleasure.
We ourselves accepted it for many years.
Yeah, we must be dark because we want to enjoy the pleasures of life. But I mean, in ancient Kemet, the word for one of the words for pleasure was eb, right? And then another word, another definition of eb was medicine for the heart. So you have a word for pleasure and a word for medicine for the heart, for the ebb. It's the same word, so it's.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, we're ready for.
We're ready for
pleasure.
The pleasure denouncers?
No. I mean, we're ready for that because if you look at it, people are in record droves driving away, not just from the Judeo-Christian, the traditional, Abrahamic faiths, but also from modern spiritual. You have people who are just opting out because they're kind of like, if being not spiritual means that I have to let everything slide, not really speak up for myself, denounce all pleasure, denounce
material wealth. I can't get money because that's anti-spiritual. If I get money,
I'm, not interested.
Yeah.
So we can understand, for those people, maybe it's in their blood and their ancestry to follow a different path. And so that's really what we wanted to talk about, is that there is just this dominance of one world view, and that is become synonymous with what it means to be spiritual and mean to be trying to unite with God. And that just, our ancestors aren't standing for it anymore. They're like, listen, it's time for the world to really come to embrace our ancestral ways and know that this is a big piece to the puzzle. It's almost like watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, and like 4 of the 5 nations. You only got
3 or 4. It's 4 nations. 4 nations. 3 of the 4. It's only the fire. It's only what the Fire Nation says. The Fire Nation defines spirituality and everything, and no one else does. Everybody just says yes. That's what it is. It's disrespectful. It's disrespectful to all indigenous people on the planet. But we know this though. We know this. It's just that when it comes to spirituality, we think that it's something different because we're like, it's just love and light.
And so. One thing before we wrap up, I wanted to talk a little bit about
the individuality,
the individualism, because you can't go a day without hearing someone talking about their path, their journey,
their personal journey, its journey with the self.
And not knocking people trying to just uplift and really refine and become the best version that they can of themselves. But within those statements, it just goes again to show the dominance of one worldview, because from Black ancestral perspective, we would never just be like, well, this is just my path, my journey, without that connection to what's in your blood and who paved the way for you to be here, for you to even come back into this world.
Yeah. You got here by yourself. You dropped from the sky, so it's all about you,
Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, you had to go through your mother and father to get here, and just through further meditation and reflection, just and our own practice and our own tradition, realizing how much the things that you do is relative to, your ancestors.
My dream that I am seeing right now manifested is that when we hear people speak, they're going to say, my path and my ancestral path, and say both of them and not exclude one for the other, because no, we're not just an extension of our ancestors. We have our own individual essence to stamp on this world and contribute what we've come to contribute, but it's also just understanding that but I'm being pushed forward, and
I want to add something to that too.
It's possible because of the work of my ancestors.
And what I want to add to that is from a Kemetic perspective. You know, you get your ka from your father, you get your eb from your mother, right? And eb is your will. So it's we anybody who studies Kemetic history or doctrine, you know that your ka, your eb, your ba, these are very important pieces of your spirit, right? So even you having these things and be able to maneuver in the world cannot happen without your mother's bloodline, your father's bloodline, their problems. I mean, we're an amalgamation, right? Heru, when he was born, he inherited the problems of Osir and Osset. He wasn't his own person. He inherited those problems, and that is for all of us, all of humanity, regardless of your race. It's the same fundamental principles that are going to be happening. So,
Yes. Yes, wonderful. Well, this has been, a really great conversation. We want to hear from you. Have you noticed any of these issues in modern spirituality? How did you come to notice them?
yeah.
What steps are you taking to safeguard yourself against some of the ills of modern spirituality, or even modern day, any of the Judeo-Christian religions? We love to hear from you.
Yes.
And and we look forward to our conversation next week, where we will talk about
more about our
philosophy here at Astro Aura.
And we would love to hear what you have to say. We know there are many of us who are out there who feel this way, who are burning inside. Their heart is burning inside. Some people are scratching their heads like, yes, it is my birthday. Like, yes, it's true. Yes, this did happen. So please let us know. We would love to hear from you, and we honestly expect to hear from you. We look forward to it. And thank you, and see you next week.
Take care.
Peace.